because you guys at PFF released the quarterback annual, which is one of those things that I'm refreshing Twitter every day toward the end of the season looking for, because it offers a lot of great content for me to write about, because there are so many stats that you guys have. And it was fascinating to me, Steve, to see the gains that Kirk Cousins made in so many areas in the detailed numbers, but also the fact that it was still the Kirk coaster of the grades game by game look exactly like a roller coaster, which is how they've looked for his entire career. So with Kirk Cousins specifically, was there something to you that in his detailed stats that you guys put out really stuck out?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of like the flow of those games, right? I mean, you get ebbs and flows in his career, or points in his season throughout his career, but those first couple weeks were just terrible. And I thought even like week 4 against the Bears, I believe it was, where he just, I remember joking that he escaped with a 90 passer rating despite fumbling and just not really looking all that good. But he did go on a pretty consistent run after that. So I thought that the accuracy was solid for Cousins. I thought he did a nice job, playing well for the majority of the season, for whatever that's worth, rather than having more ebbs and flows. It was that like week 5 and on. I mean, there was a lot of really good, consistent play, and this was the first year. It was his highest graded year for us, so I thought that was really good to see as well, because he had normally been the guy where we'd say, the stats are a little empty. They're not really the truth. And I thought this year was one of the first years where he kind of played up to some of those numbers that he put up.
So the little mini headline I had in my article breaking down some of the numbers was that his strengths got stronger. Like it seemed to me, Steve, like they put him in more positions to succeed this year than he had been since maybe 2016 when he was working with Sean McVay. And Mike Zimmer made it very clear at the end of the year he wanted the Kubiak offense to stay, and so they just hired Gary Kubiak to be the offensive coordinator. I think that they found the perfect mix with Kirk Cousins' skills, pocket quarterback, but can throw outside the pocket when you bootleg him out, throwing the ball 20 yards plus down the field. He has great ratings and grades when throwing down the field. But there is also this part, Steve, where I hesitate and say, doesn't Kubiak do this for everyone? So, I mean, how much is it, can we separate using the numbers, Kirk's talent and what is hard to replace versus what is scheme with Gary Kubiak that you can replace?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question, because I did some writing on this from a Shanahan lens this week, and just kind of going through the history and all the times Kyle Shanahan has been a play caller. Of course, his scheme, very similar, or if not identical, to the Kubiak scheme. It's all the same tree, and there's just this consistent history of Shanahan's and Kubiak's, just making quarterbacks play better, essentially getting production out of mid-tier quarterbacks, I would say. And then when they did get a high-end quarterback, Kyle got Matt Ryan in 2016, they break the league with MVP caliber numbers. So there's certainly something to this history of their play action heavy scheme and all the things that they do to just create quarterback production. I think the best way to always weigh that, though, is with the PFF grade versus whatever, statistical output you want to compare it to, whether it's adjusted net yards per attempt or just yards per attempt or passer rating, whatever it might be. And Cousins coming into the year had 4 years top 10 in passer rating, and only one of those he was a top 10 PFF graded quarterback. And that always said, there's some inflation there. There's some help. There's some Sean McVays. There's some Deshaun Jacksons helping. I thought this year was a really nice year to kind of mesh both. And it's nice to see him in that, familiar system with a Kubiak who has that consistent success. And the ultimate goal, no matter what you think of Kirk Cousins or not, is to get that passing production, right? At the end of the day, is to create a productive pass game. And I think they have the elements to do that.
So how do you guys figure out and project what he'll do in 2020? It's the same system, so you can assume a lot of the same things will work, and they'll probably add to it because it's easier to add to a system that everybody knows the terminology and everything else. But there's also our old friends in baseball would love to talk about regression. And when someone has a career year in quarterback rating and PFF grade and everything else, if they go from being generally the 14th best quarterback in the league to the 5th for a year, can you really count on them to continue that production next season when potentially, things change, maybe injuries or maybe schedule difficulty and things like that?
No, that's a fair question too. I mean, I think the thing that we have to isolate from just the overall PFF grade is where did it come from, and focus on the things that are more stable year to year, and it is, the non-play action stuff. It's the standard drop back, so not those rollouts. And Cousins did fare well in a lot of those key areas that will essentially remain stable from year to year. So that part I think is good, and I think a lot of it just hinges upon the playmaking situation. Do they try to have a better wide receiver 3 situation, right? Do they try to just upgrade all of the situation around him? I think that is the way to kind of mitigate regression, is by getting more playmakers and attacking the field with more playmakers. So even if Cousins doesn't play as well next year, if you can make the situation around him even better, then there's a chance you can get to that same production level, which was really good this year.
It was, Steve, but something that comes to mind with me with Kirk Cousins all the time, and I'm looking through these numbers and saying, wow, with some of these stats, they probably should have won a little more. And I wonder how much how much value you think the Vikings lose with the fact that Kirk Cousins can't move. He can't escape. He can't make extra plays off schedule. He doesn't throw it downfield into coverage and get those pass interference penalties that Aaron Rodgers is famous for. I mean, how much value do they lose with the fact that he doesn't have that like baller mentality?
There's definitely something to it, and there are elements to Cousins' game that have always kind of brought that up. I think we were just talking, a few of us talking about just some of the boneheaded plays that he's made. We were just talking about this the other day. Randomly under pressure, panics, throws a backwards lateral against the Jets in 2018. Of course, the famous, I pressed the wrong Madden button and I spiked it or kneeled instead of spiking, right? I mean, those kind of instinctual plays aren't there. The complete opposite of that stud quarterback playing this weekend in Patrick Mahomes. So I think that's always a concern, right? It's always going to be a concern if the game flow's not there. And even though Cousins made a few nice comebacks this year and all that stuff, it's still not a position you really want to be in with him. So I think ultimately he's like a lot of other quarterbacks in that middle tier of quarterbacks where you create this ecosystem around him, try to extract that production, but I'm never going to have this clean answer that like, hey, just go give it to Kirk. He'll go win the game for you.
Right.
But that's him and like 15 other quarterbacks around the league. So I think it's just knowing what you're getting into in that respect.
2018 had a lot more of those than 2019. And my favorite was a play that went down as, I think, a run. He panicked and turned around and threw it overhand to Latavius Murray, who was like 4 feet from him. And it was one that, it would never go down as a butt fumble or something because it wasn't a turnover. But Murray is somehow paying attention enough to grab it. If he doesn't grab it, the ball just goes 20 yards backwards and rolls around. It would have been one of the most like mind-blowing, hilarious bloopers ever if Latavius Murray is not somehow ready for that. So you're totally right with those. You never know when there's going to be that brain freeze there. Or as you said, the controller comes unplugged or your little brother grabs it and starts mashing buttons. That does seem to happen to him. With Jimmy Garoppolo, I think here in Minnesota, look at Garoppolo and Jared Goff as being like, yeah, those guys are Kirk-like because their production is bolstered by the coordinator that they have or the head coach, the person calling the plays. How similar or different is Jimmy Garoppolo from Kirk Cousins?
Oh, I think there are a lot of similarities there. So here's the thing, right? We're supposed to be at PFF number driven and we grade every single player on every play and all that stuff. And then I think you get into that situation where, and again, I was just having this conversation recently too about just QB wins, which I'll get fired if I mention that as a stat, right? Like, I'm not allowed to discuss that. But I think the same way analytics folks look at like draft position in the draft, and they say, if you're drafted number 1, there's probably a whole lot of other teams that like you, and there's all these other things that kind of roll into, hey, you're the number 1 draft pick, therefore you're probably more likely to be good. And they use that kind of as a variable. I think QB wins is kind of a variable in this whole thing, where over time, if Kirk Cousins doesn't beat a whole lot of winning teams, or his team doesn't win a whole lot of against a whole lot of winning teams, maybe there's something to it. I think that would be like the one place where you separate a Garoppolo and a Cousins. Say what you want about the throw for throw production, how it's come about, the system and all that stuff. Garoppolo has won, even with a bad 2017 49ers team that had 1 or 2 wins when he took over, and then they went undefeated. There's something to him finding a way to win, and Cousins maybe not. So if there is a separator, it's not the separator that is maybe analytically sound, but I think there might be a little bit of signal in that whole thing that maybe separates Garoppolo over Cousins.
But I like quarterback win-loss record is as a starting point to try and figure out why it is what it is. So when we look at Kirk Cousins, the only reason we're here is for teams to win, right? We're not here for them to score 85 PFF grades. We're here for wins and losses.
Of course.
If you look at Kirk Cousins as a 500 quarterback for a large part of his career, you have to say, all right, was it the defense? Or was it the fact that he wouldn't throw into coverage? Or was it the fact that he had, I don't know what it was for EPA, but they lost like 20 points because he was just bad at running or whatever, what is it about his game that can explain this? And with Jimmy Garoppolo, I think it's just the fact that when push comes to shove, the guy will make the throw. That he's got a quick release, and if he's got people coming down on him, he will make that throw into coverage that you need, or he'll spot that guy down the field and make that throw. So even if he's not perfect throughout an entire game, sometimes you don't have to be. It's just they need a big play from you. And that's like with Eli Manning, I know that we all fought with each other for 60 days straight or whatever about whether he's a Hall of Famer. I don't so much care about that. But when he was at his best, he would just throw it. Like double coverage, you're not supposed to make that throw, but whatever. He'll take that shot. And a lot of times for quarterbacks, Steve, I think that pays off.
Yeah, as you were explaining that, and before you mentioned Eli, I was thinking Eli. I was thinking, here's Eli who landed exactly at 500 and did it a completely different way from Kirk Cousins. Maybe stuff early in the game didn't go great, and the Giants are more likely to lose, but Eli's going to go down with a fight. And so he led a ton of fourth quarter comebacks. He did that. The other QB win thing, because I always need to try to praise Tom Brady. He needs more praise, from people. But QB wins, of course, he's got the best win-loss record, all that stuff, but he has it in every situation. When he throws the ball 40 times, when he throws the ball 50 times, which was by design and game plan because he is that good. In fourth quarter comebacks, he has the best record in every situation. When his defense gives up 30 points, 20 points, whatever it might be. So I think Brady has been able to show that he can adjust to the situation. He can be a game manager. He can chuck it down the field. He can do whatever it takes to find a way to win. So that's where I think you find, some information in the win-loss record to go with all the other